So I have been reading this book uh, nonstop at night, and I'm like I skate to one song only, and it's nonfiction. This is, I think, firmly the most exciting nonfiction book that I have picked up in a very long time, written by an old friend of mine. I Can't Save You is the book, and we have Anthony Chin-Quee here. I know him by Tony. How's it going, Tony?
It's going great, man. It's so good to see you. It's been a
Yeah.
while.
Yeah, it's been a while. We went to high school together. And
Mhm.
so part of this book I was there for, and it's been incredible, really incredible to hear how you've become a board certified otolaryngologist with degrees from Harvard University, Emory University School of Medicine, and by the way, an award winning storyteller with the Moth and writing staff of Fox's The Resident, and a medical advisor for ABC's Grey's Anatomy. Just quite a journey. And so maybe I can start with a cliche, a book. Really? Isn't therapy cheaper? Like we could have gone that route, right?
Well, I mean, I feel like I've always been a storyteller. I mean, I was in all the plays and stuff like growing up, and I loved playing music and singing, dancing, all that sort of thing. And so, you know, telling stories is my favorite way of trying to express myself. And it's something that I thought I'd lost in the journey through medicine, and luckily found it partway through, and realized telling the story of how I went through it. Thought that might resonate with some folks, and I just did my best to do that journey justice and kind of give voice to some thoughts and experiences that we may be uncomfortable saying out loud a lot of the time, and see if I could start some reflection and conversation with folks who are reading it.
I mean, this story combines so many narratives uh, in a poetic, in a fun, in a painful, in a like, frankly, page turning way. We have elements of racism. We have elements of the, violation of the Hippocratic Oath, right? Like what it means to be a
Hmm.
doctor in this country through, like, we just went through a little thing, the pandemic, and then also, frankly, very intimate relationships that begin with your parents, with your father as a figure throughout this, and then
Hmm.
trickle into your relationship with women
Hmm.
that frankly just make for a good read.
Yeah.
But also you're just like, wow, he said that.
Yeah.
What has been some of the more interesting feedback? I was reading just on like NPR, like no big deal, like NPR doing a little summary. What has been some of the most interesting feedback you've gotten here?
Yeah. I think the most interesting feedback has come from people who I've known throughout the journey, who have chimed in to kind of share how it made them feel. And this is people from folks I grew up with and back in Brooklyn, to folks who I was in training with, in med school with, have met afterwards. Um, it's been interesting seeing the feedback from physicians, um, especially kind of marginalized physicians like female physicians and physicians of color. Um, and they just been so it's been so gratifying that me sharing some of my experiences have kind of given voice to experiences they've gone through, and experiences they've tried to tell themselves weren't as crazy as they thought they were. And it just seeing that some of these stories really validated people's experiences has been really wonderful. And some of the folks who show up in the book actually reached out to me, and I mean, there's plenty of folks I don't expect to hear from, because not
I
everybody
think I
comes
know
out
where
looking
like
like
the one
roses.
star rating. Like I was looking at the
Yeah.
ratings, I was like, I think I know who that is.
But yeah, some of those I don't
You
expect to
earned
hear
it.
from, but
You earned it.
yeah, but I mean, some of the folks, even who I've had complicated relationships with, reached out to really kind of show appreciation, and kind of mend some bridges sometimes, which is always really really wonderful. That wasn't my intention, but it's been really nice to kind of get close to some folks that I thought I'd lost, forever. So it's been really a wonderful reception so far, and I've been so happy about it.
Um, have you have you thought about charging for absolving white people of guilt? That seems to be a theme. Is like, what's the fee? Can I Venmo you? Like,
Yeah,
talk to me
so
about this as a business.
I think that there are probably some people who might take you up on that. I'm not that guy, but I think that it's I talk about a lot of stuff in this book, especially my relationships with white folks as I've gone through different and more elite circles with my professional development, and as you do that, the the diversity gets a lot scarcer, and I've just learned how to navigate in those circles. But there's so much that I've learned that white allies should be doing or can do, but just choose not to because it's the path of least resistance. Like white people don't have to think about racism if they don't feel like it. You know what I mean? Which is different from how I experience the world, where I have to think about it and experience it every day. And so I would like for lots of white folks to do the work and be a little more courageous with their position of privilege. But I'm not going to be the one to teach you how to do that. I think there's a world full of books that can set you on the right path. And then if you've done the work and the research and the put in the time, then I'm happy to chat. And if it's for a low fee of you know
There it is.
$20 a minute on the phone like that, that's fine. I'll take that.
Simple.
But we'll work out the model, and I'll of course credit George with the with the idea.
This white
um
guy over here came up with it. Oh God.
yeah, just like there's a white guy behind all
That'll
this
go
stuff, just
well.
FYI.
Cut that, cut that, cut that. Yeah, look, I think the you know Black Lives Matter movement of George Floyd, we've lived through this, and I think in the
Mhm,
nonprofit sector especially, there is a danger of that allyship leading to like, oh, great, every, let's say, black employee, black or brown employee I have is now the expert, is my teacher, is my, how do I
mhm,
get my white guilt absolved? And you really drive a truck right at this again
mhm,
and again in the book. We have a lot of social impact leaders that have, I will say, their hearts firmly in the right place, but execution is lacking.
mhm,
Not so much advice, but I think this book and reading it with that perspective, just it it puts you just in your head, frankly, which is a weird
mhm.
place.
Yeah,
Like,
it's a
weird place.
very strange place to be. But I think that, I mean, that can be, if that's my gift to the movement, then that's great. Because I just like in your sector in medicine, we do have a lot of well-meaning white people there who are trying their best to uh, be allies. But ultimately it ends up just like it does in your sectors with diversity, equity, and inclusion leaders who are the one black person on your staff who gets this responsibility to educate everybody on how to deal with their the racism that they've just lived with and embraced without really knowing it a lot of the time. um, and then it's our responsibility once again. And most of those positions are not uh positions that get you more salary, they just get you more work, which is awesome because we're kind of propping up some systems there that need breaking. But you know I think that there's so much work that white people can do with their position and their privilege if only they were energized and motivated to do so. You don't need a black person to teach you that you've been messing up, or that you, I mean, or that you walk through the world with blinders on. I mean, there's so many resources for you to understand that on your own. And then, you know, once you've done the work of understanding that, then we could talk, you know, and like, you know, I'll let you into my head and help with some of the vocabulary that might be lacking. I mean, I've done this with, you know, there's a character in the book who I went through medical training with, who was just, you know, we were the two guys in our year. He was a white guy, I was a black guy, and I, you know, he there were so many spaces in which he could have stood up for me or done the right thing or made a difference, and he chose not to because he was nervous, he was scared. And we actually, after training, and this is post book, you know, became really good friends because we sat down one day and he actually told me about all those moments
Hmm.
that you know, people were talking trash about me at work, and he just thought, you know, the best thing for me would be to protect me from that. And so he didn't say anything, but just didn't tell me. And
Hmm.
meanwhile, I'm thinking I'm a lunatic, that I'm completely nuts because I think people are talking about me. And I think this is going on behind closed doors, but there's no way I can prove it. And it's making me lose my mind. And you know, only several years after did I learn the truth and was validated in realizing, like, oh, I wasn't crazy. This was really happening, and it's really shitty. And
Yeah.
so, you know, I think he felt a lot of guilt about that, and I think he was looking for me to help absolve that, and I didn't. And I
What
just
is it?
told him,
$20
like,
a minute?
yeah, I mean, I
That's
wasn't getting the check, so I was like,
mm.
listen, man, like, here's the work that I expect of you now that you're finally awake. You know, like, this is the work I expect of you. This is the work I expect you to do with your children. You know, that you're raising white men in America. Like, that's a massive responsibility if you're going to make the world a better place, like you would like to. And so, you know, we had those conversations, and we still do. Um, but it took a long time for him to awaken to the dangers, of like silent allyship.
Yeah, I think that's that phrase silent allyship is sort of like the first word betrays the second part, I feel like a touch.
Yeah, it does, and
It's like
that's what
silent
the
applause. Like if I'm getting silent applause, am I getting applause? What is the
exact.
sound of one hand clapping, Tony?
That's it. That's exactly what it is. I mean, you know, are you an ally if I can't see it or if I can't feel it? You know, you got to figure that out. So
Okay.
we dip into that stuff in the book, which is super fun.
This book, you mean? Right here?
That book that
That can
everybody
be
should buy.
purchased on Amazon
Oh
as I
yes.
speak. There are some ridiculously intense medical moments. And if you're watching this on YouTube, I want you to know if you simply search for how to like fix a finger and adjust, like that could be considered medical training. I don't know if you could just tease this, like the first time you were like, the pager goes off and you're sitting
Yes.
there like, oh, I'm going in, coach. And you're
Oh
like,
man.
I'm going to YouTube. I was
Oh
like,
yeah.
are you kidding me? Are you kidding me?
It is not a joke. Like, so just to set the scene,
Set the scene,
you
scene.
know, it's the first couple of days in July, and new doctors straight out of med school start in the hospitals July 1st. They're just a couple weeks out of med school, and they know absolutely nothing. Okay. But we're supposed to start taking care of patients, right? And so I had my first day on call, which means I was the only representative for my service in the entire hospital for 12 hours. And I'd been a doctor officially for like 72 hours. So I totally knew, you know,
Right.
everything, right? And then I got a call from the ER uh, to help fix a dislocated finger. And I was the expert on call in the hospital. I was the expert, right? Um, and so had to weigh some things. what are the chances I could really do permanent damage to this finger
Oh God.
if I just try? You know, and other people had tried. Maybe I should just try, or maybe I should call and ask for help. So I decided to try, um, which is a position lots of young doctors understand. And I went on YouTube and just looked up some stuff on how to do it, and then to find out how that worked out, you can buy the book.
Yeah. Spoiler alert, you're no longer a doctor, but actually, I will say through 75% of the book, I was like, anybody who's going to become or is thinking about becoming a doctor should not read this book. And then I got to, I think it's the fatherhood chapter.
Hmm.
And it was just fascinating because it is clear that you had gone through this sort of absolute valley of darkness and come out, and suddenly we're watching this next generation rise in, and knowing that, I'm like, if there are doctors like that are reading it, it was like, oh God, that is how to do your job, because you saw how not to do your job. I don't know if there's anything that you can talk to about, like, all right, you're about to go into this industry, especially if you were a black or brown person, um, that this book can bring them.
Yeah, and thanks for saying that, because I don't mean with this story to discourage people from
Mm.
going into medicine. I don't want less doctors. I want more doctors who are taking care of themselves and are taken care of by the system. Um, and so when I think about the doctors like coming up behind me, all and even in residency and training, all I wanted was for them not just to not go through what I went through, but to feel just maybe a little more empowered with their lives and their position, with their identity, because it's it's imperative that black and brown faces, women, folks of all genders, coming into medicine, and really any of these high powered industries where you are the other by a significant margin. It's imperative that going in, that world that you're entering was not built for you. It wasn't built to be hospitable for you. And, in many cases, it's kind of built to be hostile towards you. And so, how do you navigate that? And how do you maintain your own identity in the process? Um, where are there opportunities to change that culture? And where are you going to take losses in the fight that are going to hurt? Like there's just there's so many peaks and valleys to the journey, but you know I felt so strongly about empowering the next generation to understand that stuff up front so that they could decide how they wanted to fight.
A theme in here also, I think, that probably disproportionately affects brown and black people is the imposter syndrome element. This
Hmm.
imposter syndrome, like I did a terrible job on the intro. Maybe I'll try again. Maybe not, but Harvard, I've heard of it.
Hmm.
Medical school, pretty good. And it just seems like there is an imposter monster following you around constantly. And I think that also exists a lot for, many nonprofit leaders that are asked to take on incredibly difficult and dynamic problems without necessarily the like mountain of training,
Hmm.
and saying like why do I deserve to be in this room? Why can
Yeah.
I apply for this X $100,000 grant? Why do I deserve X? Like, I don't know. Can you unpack your relationship with imposter syndrome a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was really kind of uh a deep theme throughout the book and really throughout my life. Um,
This
but I
book.
think the deal with imposter syndrome and just kind of taking the medical journey, for example, is that I realized, like, I felt like an imposter because I wanted to be doing the best I could at my job, but I knew I didn't have the tools to do it. And nobody around me was making me feel like they were having the same doubts. um, we're all conditioned, especially in medicine, to show each other how bulletproof we are, and how, I mean, I'm sure I looked to other people like I was fine. You know what I mean? Just like they appeared to me. And so, even though we're struggling and we want to be better, we just don't quite know how to do it. And then once you get that in your head, then you feel like you don't belong there. And then, anytime you make any mistake, you're just like, well, this is evidence that I shouldn't have this position. um it's very real. And so how do we navigate through that, especially like for people in any industry? I know anybody worth their salt who is running a company or in any position, any leadership position, has those feelings. You have those feelings when you care about what you're trying to do. um, and so getting through that, I think a great first start is communicating it and talking with people about it. You don't have to be an island in any of these positions, and you should be able to share these feelings, because they betray just how passionate you are about what you do and how well you want to do it. And I think that eventually, the more time you put in, the more expertise and experience you gain, that pit of insecurity that initially was imposter syndrome can evolve. And you start asking yourself different questions. So instead of asking yourself, like, am I supposed to be here? Once you gain the experience, you're asking yourself, okay, um, now why am I here? Do I still love what I'm doing? Am I doing this to the best of my ability? Am I making the impact that I want to make in order to be great in this position? And I think that stems from the same place as imposter syndrome. It's just, you're 20 years down the line and you kind of know some of what you're doing. But I think ultimately it's something that we shouldn't run away from. It's something we should embrace. We should discuss and communicate about. And I think it ultimately makes people better at leadership.
There were incredible moments of vulnerability shown in this book, and as you grow into your position as a doctor, and it's clear that there are moments where you're just not scoring what you need to, the incredible pressures of hit this number or you're done, like all that
Mhm.
investment done, like off a cliff.
Yeah.
And you have this inner monologue going that is also, by the way, dealing with a dormant racism that just sort of pops up like a little a-hole throughout the book, and you're like, oh,
Mhm.
that thing,
Yeah.
we're already doing this other stuff. But this imposter monstrum, it also seems like when you walked into like just really intense parts of this book of like life or death. I think a lot of people use the life or death. You can not figuratively, literally say that you're performing tracheotomy type work,
Mhm.
and actually that moment you're like, where did that imposter go? Like you come in like a boss, and you're like, if I show doubt, if I don't assess the situation, if the people on this team right now don't have faith and can't follow in, like it was amazing to watch that sort of like snap moment. I was like, oh shit, that's a doctor, that's not
Mhm.
the scared college kid. Can you tell me what that was like? Is that sort of what that looks like? Moments of leadership, moments of vulnerability, there's time for both.
Yeah. Um, I think there's absolutely time for both. I think that in those moments, kind of those high pressure moments, even though I wasn't always 100% sure what to do, or how exactly to do it, I knew that no matter how loud the room is, no matter how many alarms are going and people yelling, there's always time to slow yourself down.
Hmm.
There's always time to take a breath and just be like, okay, I'm not going to get caught up in the panic of all this, because it is panic that's going on around you. Um, and if I can just slow myself down and don't join in the fray of yelling and screaming and rushing and dropping things, um, then the people around me will slow down too, and they'll see that, you know we have this under control. There will be a plan. We can try. And on the inside, of course, I'm just freaking out. But I know, I've seen enough stuff in my life to know that if you show people you're freaking out, then they're gonna freak out, and then it's just gonna all go to hell. So Even in those early days when just the crunch was on and I was definitely in over my head, I knew the value of calm in a storm. Um, and I tried to fake it until I believed it.
Part of me hates fake it till you make it.
Hmm.
It just it rhymes, so humans say it, but it was more than that. Um, there's it's like courage until you make it is what I saw in your book. It wasn't
Hmm.
faking it. It was showing up responsibly, being like, my pager went off. I'm the person doing this. And actually, one of the more, there's a lot of powerful points, but one of the more impressive points was when actually you were standing in the back of the room, having previously coached somebody reporting to you.
Hmm.
I'm using layman language. Obviously,
Yeah, yeah, it's perfect. Yeah, you're doing great.
I don't write for Grey's Anatomy. Sorry. I think doctors should always have a stethoscope around their necks because that's how you know they're doctors, Tony.
Hmm.
But there's this beautiful point as you're moving and you have coached somebody, and I wonder if you can talk to leaders that are trying to get that next generation, that A player, to show up in the room, and you stood back and you just watched it unfold, and you're like,
Hmm.
she's nailing it, and you got her head in the right place. And I was just like, that if I could just bottle that, I would pay
Hmm.
$20 a minute for that shit.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I it's really it's really about building folks confident, just building them up, because so much of training is being torn down and being told what you don't know and that your answers are wrong and all that sort of stuff. But you need opportunities to shine and show what you can do, without without knowing how much of a safety net you have behind you. I think in an educational scenario, you should always have a safety net. And that's what I was trying to be for the folks who I watched from the other side of the room. Like, I knew the extent of their abilities. Like, I knew when it would get too much for them, but I
Mm.
needed them to get up to that point. And so, in a life or death situation, like, to be able to get to the point where you can watch it unfold and you can know that, okay, they're nailing everything that they're supposed to do, but also know, like, if this patient is a lost cause and they're gonna die anyway,
Mm.
um, the outcome. And I think, in in the story you're talking about, like, I knew what was gonna happen, what had already happened. But I needed
Oh God, that's
the next
devastating.
generation to have that experience, um, to both know that they were doing the right thing and know that sometimes that's just not going to be enough, and then learn how to process those moments, because we're not taught how to do that either. um, I think that's just part. I mean, I love teaching, I love education. I was a teacher at some point in my journey, and I take that stuff really seriously. um, and those moments, I'm not just making guinea pigs out of my junior residents. It's just, they're doing their job, they're doing their best, they're doing a great job, and it's my job to be there to support them, protect them when necessary, and you know be a counselor afterwards when it's time to decompress.
As a leader, I think at the top of my list is never put somebody in a no-win situation. My job is always to put somebody in a position to win, put the team in a position to win,
Mm-hmm.
and to think of it on the inverse of, like, if there is a scenario where there is no win because we're dealing in the real world. I think
Mm-hmm.
a lot can be learned, but
It's
I
tough. It's really tough, and that's like, I had to, in those scenarios where I knew the outcome for the patient was going to be poor. I was thinking, okay, but how is this going to be formative? How to where's the win
how's
in
this mean
this?
something?
Yeah,
This is
where
going
it,
to
like,
happen. How
we
does this
gotta
mean something?
understand that there is a win in having had this experience, and how do we get to the core of that afterwards? and not just have you walk around with the trauma of losing. Um, it's a tough question. I think it's something that, we as leaders should be asking ourselves.
I don't think there's maybe one medical scene that might make it into Grey's Anatomy, but I was like, well, that wouldn't make the cut. That wouldn't make the cut. There's like, I'll just look, here's the disclosure. Like, don't read this directly before bedtime. Like, some parts fine, but oh gosh.
No,
Um,
George had
wow.
bad dreams because
Wow.
there's a little bit of nightmare fuel in it. Like that's absolutely true.
Yeah, but we've talked about, so if you're looking in the medical profession, it's just interesting. It's there, right? If you're a leader, if you're moving into a world that your work impacts others in the social impact sector, like there were elements for you. And then the other big one for me is as a parent, and now I know that you're a parent.
Mhm.
After writing this book, I wouldn't mind have seen an extra epilogue on that, but I'm sure the ink was dry by that point. But your
Mhm.
final line, and this is not a spoiler, but is a bit of a forgive or an understand for your father. And now, as you're a
Mhm.
father, I wonder, as you look at this book as a dad, how does that change at all the narrative that your father plays throughout this?
Mm. I think that, I mean, I think my father, he's a big figure in this book, and I think that his my experience with him, who he is, how he affected me, it looms large in every uh, decision I make and thought I have, as regards my family and my child. Um, and I spent a lifetime uh, getting to the point where I could understand that his mistakes didn't have to be my mistakes. And the fact that I think so hard and work so hard to be someone who others can depend on and can express love in a very clear and non-transactional and non-toxic way. The fact that I am constantly asking myself those questions, I think, um, means that I'm on the road to doing it well, even though I didn't have uh, that example uh, throughout my life. And so, getting to that point where I could just appreciate my experience with my father, for what it was and how formative it was for me in the end. It took a long time um, to get to the point where I wasn't just angry all the time.
Well, it took the entire book. It was
It
like
took yeah,
the,
it took
the
the entire book, and the
full
book
book.
spanned some time, but like, yeah, it's just to let go of anger and let go of the desire that he'd suddenly someday act the way I always wanted him to, and put myself in the driver's seat of that relationship for the first time. Instead of just reacting to what he does and doesn't do, you realize the power that you have yourself to define your experience, and define that sort of to define that relationship as well. Um, so I don't think like the ghost of my dad is ever gone. It's kind of with me a lot, but it's on my terms now. And it's in a way that I think makes me um, a lot more powerful and a lot more positive and a lot more effective in my own family.
And I think reading this also as a parent, or any parent, has high expectations for your child, and you sort of map those out. You're like, yeah, no, I it was clear that my family expected we either go become a doctor or a lawyer or a
Mm-hmm.
fill in the achievement blank.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like, you're like, why did you become a doctor? You're like, I could give you many answers. Like,
Yeah.
well, let's be clear why I became a doctor here.
Yeah. Yeah, that the pipeline, especially when it's West Indian immigrants, but for a lot of first gen kids of immigrant parents, it's so funny. Like I said in the book, you have these parents who were risk takers, who took the biggest risk, took the biggest adventure of their lives to leave their home and come someplace else and carve out something new. They did all that in hopes that you would never have to take risks like that. And so, if you can achieve, they're going to kind of funnel you into these occupations that are, prestigious but safe ultimately. But the thing is, we're a parent's children, and that adventure gene doesn't go away. They got to know it's going to come out at some point.
Remember
And
how we got here? Remember that part?
yeah, exactly. So, I don't think they should be super surprised when we kind of have our own ideas about the adventures that we want to go on. So I thought that was a realization I came to as I was writing that I thought was pretty fun.
The other thing that was definitely put in the back of my mind, as you can see, like we've touched on so many different topics because this book just, and it goes, and you're like suddenly like, oh, I'm reading spoken word poetry. Oh, I'm reading like uh a modern day Grey's Anatomy. Oh, I'm reading like it was just so interesting. I was like, well, what are we getting tonight? Kind of for me going through it though, from what I remember in high school, like you were, it was like just sort of like the idea of perfection. I was like, well, that's perfection. Glad I
Mm,
can see that. It was just everything was so buttoned up, perfect execution of, head of the play, super athletic, uh, you know, perfect grades. It was just, I think the wind was always at your back somehow. I was like, well, that's delightful. And it
mm,
was amazing that you're like, your inner monologue is like, it has to be perfect. It has to be tight. It has to, like, because of that echo of your father in the background. But, I just sort of now put in the back of my mind, wow, it'll be a bit of a note, I think, when I see people that are putting that version of themselves on nonstop, that like, I mean, it's worth having a second conversation. And then I don't know if you could roll back the clock and have a coaching session with yourself, if anything would change, or if you're just like, no, I survived and that's what I had to do. I had to put on that version of me.
hmm Um, I think if I had this talk with myself, back then, I wouldn't have listened. And I would get it. I don't think it's healthy to live that way. But I understand why folks do it, and I understand why I did it. It's how I understood the world to be at the time. That you know, failure on my part wasn't wasn't an option because I could just, everything could just go away. I was just on a tightrope, is how I felt all the time. I was just nervous all the time, you know. And yeah, you can manage to achieve, in that way, but holy cow, when you take a minute to stop and allow yourself all the feelings that you've been you know hiding away. There's so much pain there, there's so much fear, you're so scared all the time. And I would encourage myself, I think, to try to feel those things, just so that you have some sort of balance. The world may not be fair, and if you feel like this is the face you have to put on, I hate that the world makes you feel this way, but I understand. But please take care of yourself. And that's a lesson that a lot of us, I think, would do well to learn. And it's hard to listen to. It's hard to believe that taking care of ourselves in that vulnerable way is one of our most important jobs, but it really is.
It was a real gift to get to read this, and I feel like at the end, I was like, I kept turning the pages. I was like, all right, next, where's the next chapter? Where's the next part? Although something tells me the next chapter of fatherhood will be different but more interesting. I I'm sad we're coming to an end here. I'm curious, how do people find you? How do people help you? Give us the rundown. Where can we get this book? How can
hmm
people contact you for what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So once again, book's called I Can't Save You. I'm Anthony Chin-Quee, and it's available anywhere you get books. If you do it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, or your local independent bookstore, which I say always try to support. You can get it anywhere. You can also get it as an audiobook if you'd like to hear me narrating it.
Oh, I'm excited. I got the first copy of. I'm gonna have to have that happen.
Yeah, I've heard. I mean, I can't listen to myself talking for 11 hours, but I've heard from folks that it's a good experience. So definitely do that if that's your vibe. You can find me on Twitter. You can search for my name, or I'm at CQ _ MD, and I'm also on Instagram. You just type in Anthony Chin-Quee, you'll find me. Um, and feel free to chime in, tell me how you like it, share with other folks, everything you can.
Well, there's a lot of conversations that come from it. Thank you for taking the time with us and talking through the points. What a gift. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you.